Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Thank you very much. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And once again, thank you very much for your time, interest into our these sessions. I must also say that this particular session, today's session, is happening, of course, in the backdrop of what is happening in the entire country, the devastating floods which Pakistan is passing through. And we personally believe that today's event become even more critical, even more important, and relevant and valid in the context of the disasters the country is facing right now. It has become apparent and clearer that this particular flood is because of the climate change impacts which the country is facing, and we also know that in the coming years and decades, the intensity and frequency of such floods, such disaster is going to increase. So today's session is exactly addressing some of these questions. Fundamentally, what we want to do is, of course, the topic for today is rationalizing the economic case for DRR and DRM in Pakistan, and the two major questions which we want to address, and I'm sure our excellent list of speakers is going to be talking and sharing their views on it. One is, what is the cost of inaction regarding climate change? If we're not taking action, what is the cost which we should be, potential costs which we should be expecting in future? The second is, there's a famous and there's a lot of studies which basically say that any dollar which is invested, which is spent for disaster risk reduction, results into in a multiplier effect. It results into the benefits in a lot more manner, in a multiplier way. Several studies from around the world shows the number against $1 from $6 to $15 of cost savings out of the disasters. So I don't think this kind of study has been undertaken in Pakistan so far, but we can strongly believe that the disaster risk reduction, the disaster risk management has become a very, very important critical issue right now in Pakistan. So this is what we are going to be hearing today from our experts. We have people from different backgrounds and expertise. Well, first of all, I just want to make a couple of announcements. One is that we had and we announced it, that the two ministers, one, the Minister for Climate Change, Ms. Shari Rahman, and secondly, for opening remarks, and secondly, the Honorable Minister Ahsan Iqbal, who's the Minister for Planning, Development and Special Initiatives. They both agreed to participate in this webinar, and given the importance and the relevance of the topic, but both has to travel to Karachi because of I think with the Prime Minister, and they have apologized for their presence. Nevertheless, I think our speakers, our experts, is they are very well versed, very well known, and they have actually done the work in the field. So they'll be sharing their experiences, they'll be sharing their knowledge and their opinion with us. So let's start with our very first speaker, Mr. Sajid Aslam, who's the Regional Lead Public Affairs, Asia Pacific Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, ACCA. And Mr. Sajid is going to be talking about financial adaptation to disaster risk management in Pakistan. We start off with the first presentation, and as I said, we have an excellent list of speakers, all very well versed in their own fields, in their own self. So, Mr. Sajid, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bilal. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting us there. I think ACCA, being a global accounting body and has a presence in over 180 countries, and with a members and student base of 750,000, we are hearing a lot of stuff back from our members and students that what's happening in a different part of the world, how they are contributing towards overall climate change and the action plan to really manage those risks. There's a lot of research ACC undertake every year, which is specifically designed for the climate action. And some of the stuff which I'm going to present here is some of the learnings we have within the ACCA and some of the guidance we have extracted from the other bodies who are working in the same side. So just to remind everybody what that disasters look like, and I think the recent flood has already done it very well, that this is very, very real thing. We are talking about the earthquake in 2005. There are Pakistan in floods in 2010, very recent Karachi scenario, and Gilgit, we have seen the infrastructure damages, and that's one of a picture from there. So the one thing which is very clear is that the climate action is going to be the greatest global crisis of our time. How we understand it, how we really relate that risk which it poses to Pakistan or other countries. But unfortunately, Pakistan has got a maximum vulnerability if we look at the surroundings where we live. And just because of the glaciers and the accumulation of those glaciers and up north around Pakistan, that's basically make us the 5th most vulnerable country in terms of the climate change. Now, is it something which we can avoid? Is it something which we have created? Is it something where we have contributed? The most of the question will be answered in no. From a climate change perspective or from a carbon emission perspective, Pakistan hasn't contributed even a 1% in the overall global carbon emission. And most of the stuff which we are facing right now and the risk which we are running is coming from the efforts or the industrialization which happened in the other countries. So we are more on a receiving end on that side. So the cost and the risk which we are running right now is not something which we have created, but definitely we have to contribute to make sure we offset that risk, and definitely we have to get the global support for that. If we go from a process perspective, and if we look at that, how the rest of the world is working, so National Adaptation Plan is the foundation. That's the foundation which help every country to sort out or lay out a complete adaptation plan, how they are going to manage the climate action, how they are manage the climate change risk, and then how they're going to fund it. It's not an easy thing to fund that one. And just to throw some numbers, if you look at the research, the number is running in trillions. If you look at the past 10 years, something which we were spending like 80-20 billion a year, it has gone to somewhere 160 to 200 billion a year in the last 10 years in terms of the cost or the for that devastation which we have suffered, or the disasters which happened through the climate change. Similarly, if you look at the McKinsey report, in a very recent report, they are talking about trillions of dollars every year, which will be going to just offset that risk or manage that risk or the losses that can be caused just because of the climate change. And then the world under the Paris Agreement and then the COP21 and then the COP26 and going to COP27, they have created a certain mechanism which help countries at a national level to create adaptation plan to manage climate risk. Pakistan has yet to complete and submit that. There are certain technical measures which have been taken in a recent past, but that's not going to offset the need for the national adaptation plan. And if you look at that chart, which I just shared here, this is the support other countries or regions are getting from the international funding agencies, either in terms of the capacity building or either in terms of creating a risk management system, whether we are talking about the early warning or whether we are talking about the fiscal discipline and the governance structure, which can help to really manage this kind of disaster. And that's where Pakistan come into picture, that how we are working on the National Adaptation Plan, what is the current form of the National Adaptation Plan, and then we can start talking about what is the financial muscle Pakistan needs and how we are going to raise that kind of fund. If you look at the overall plan, from a finance perspective or from a financing perspective, if you look at the overall National Adaptation Plan, there are two phases. The one is the development phase, and then there's an implementation phase. So from a development phase perspective, this is all about initiating, coordinating, and maintaining NAP process, which include a lot of institutional capacity development, a lot of stakeholder engagement, but most importantly, exactly understand what are the risks, what are the gaps, and how we are going to manage that. What are the key elements we need to manage? And then develop the implementation strategies around it. And then there is a mechanism to report and monitor that and review the progress around it. And from implementation strategy, we move towards the detailed preparation of actions. And that actions include whether it's a water related stuff, whether it's carbon emission related, whether it's a flood related stuff. So the implementation plan will have actions around different elements, which are the part of the overall groundwork or the overall gap which we have identified. And this implementation strategy bring us to the next level, that how we are going to fund that. And then the funding comes from different sources, and Pakistan is luckily have got a couple of innovative models as well available to them, not utilized, but available to Pakistan, which we can look around and see that how we can bring that fiscal resilience using that kind of opportunities which exist for Pakistan, whether it's a wind corridor or whether it's solar. So primary source, if we categorize it, so it's a domestic public finance source like the national budget, sub-national budget, and domestic climate action funds like we are talking right now, the one Bilal is heading. Then the international public financing sources, which is bilateral, multilateral, or other multilateral climate fund, and some of the development banks. And if you look at the private sector finances, so there is a private enterprises who are getting impacted through that climate change, and they are willing to invest in that. There's a private sector financier, even the venture funds and the private equity funds who are working in that domain. But the one thing which is important to understand, any financing which is coming to Pakistan or to the climate action, there is a certain reporting, review, and assurance mechanism or a governance mechanism which we need to go back and showcase that this is what the fund's for, and this is how the fund's utilized, and this is the impact it's generating. So even in the last conversation we were having on a renewable energy, the one thing which is important to understand from an investment and financing perspective, these funding is always available against a certain reward. That reward could be a financial reward, that could be a risk mitigation reward, that could be impact reward, but it's always linked with a certain impact or reward. So understanding that what reward we are going to generate and how we can demonstrate that the investment is generating that kind of return is an important element, which again bring down to the capacity of the institution to execute those projects, deploy those funding, and report back that what the impact it has generated. From a process perspective, going back to again, if we are looking at the financing side, from a process perspective, when we are working on at a development stage of NAP, the implementation strategy is the one where we have to identify the financing gaps. What are the cost of entire NAP and how we are funding it? How much money is coming from a domestic public sector budget or national budget or a sub-national budget? What additional funding requirement is? And then what are the options? So options include international finance, like we talk about, and the domestic one. But there's a one need, if you look at the determined financing option, potential financial instruments. So this is a one area which I would like to definitely suggest that there is an opportunity for Pakistan, because Pakistan is not contributor towards the carbon emission, but we can still get a lot of carbon credit because of, and we can provide a lot of carbon credit for trade because of the wind corridors and the solar corridors. So how we really structure our transaction, how we convert that into the financial instrument. So rather than going in the loans and the grants, we will have a certain revenue opportunity which can help us to fund our overall disaster risk management, which is coming from the climate change perspective. And then definitely there are different actors and responsibility. The governance structure has to be there. So this is where the financing comes into play. And again, stressing on that, we right now where we stand, the world stand, we do not have the exact estimate what kind of climate change cost we have to incur in a different region. And that's been most of the time, we have to work with the best estimate and we have to identify the risk. There's a lot of data which might be required to extrapolate and see what kind of cost it may require to be incurred just to offset some of the risk which we are trying to do. And like Bilal mentioned earlier, the $1 invested is a average return is anywhere between 7 to 15, or even in Pakistan, we still believe that it's $1 invested in a risk management provide a return of 10 times in terms of the loss avoided. So that's the kind of things which the data will help us to demonstrate that the investments are going in the right area. Number one, we cannot, again, with a certainty, estimate the overall cost of the climate change and the losses it may create in a next 5 to 10 years, but we can definitely identify the key drivers and key initiator of those risks and try to mitigate and create that kind of infrastructure, policies, and awareness which can help us to offset this as much as possible. We cannot eliminate the risk, but we can manage that risk. The key consideration from a financing perspective or adaptation finance is that it should be considered at the start. It can't come from a project to project basis. There has to be NAP which covers next 10 years, 20 years, and the overall strategy and how we are going. And it's a very iterative process. It's not a static document, and how we will keep updating that. So from a beginning, we have to see or evaluate the process and the cost of that process at the same time. Stakeholder engagement is important. Domestic public finance is very crucial to really attract the international finance. If domestically we are not investing in a one way or other, then it's very difficult to really raise the international finance. And then definitely financing, we have to go for NAP and see the gap there rather than the individual projects there. And then the every country need to pursue the finance source appropriated to their circumstances and capacity. We cannot get into the loan given the Pakistan situation, but can we have an opportunity where it become a revenue for us and we can invest that for the risk management there. Definitely from a risk management perspective, awareness, education, institutional capacity, prediction and warning system, a lot of data and technology need to be there. Peer learning, have we learned something from Bangladesh? Have we learned how they have managed that one? How we can learn from the other countries who are managing that floods for a while. This is a different level as we speak today, but there are countries who've been prone to that kind of risk for the last 10, 20 years. And then being a part of NAP global network, being a part of international public finance network, understand the availability and the condition of financing. Pakistan do have an opportunity to access that kind of funding. Pakistan haven't accessed it appropriately yet. We still lack one of a very specific or basic skill, how to create a project which is more compliant, and how we will execute that and how we will provide the assurance around it that the deliverables are there. So this is a very new area. So we cannot expect the people by themselves suddenly jump and start creating the projects appropriately. That's mean there is a certain institutional capacity and the skill which is required to be built. So that should be a part of the NAP at this stage. Just on the last 1 or 2 slides. So collaboration is a very important element here. No single ministry can create that. So Ministry for Climate Action, whatever name we call in the world, in the different countries. So any ministry which is responsible for climate action, federal, provincial, subnational, Ministry of Finance, Ministry for Planning, and then the special authorities and the bodies which are created or funds which are created there at a federal and provincial level, they need to collaborate and work very close. And then NAP process, again, the institutional arrangement, information sharing, capacity development, financing, these are the center of everything to enable as an enabling factor, while the overall NAP process include the planning, reporting, monitoring, and evaluation and implementation. So just on a last summary side, climate change is a global crisis, and I think it's very recognized, but the most important thing which we need to recognize, Pakistan is very vulnerable due to that glaciers, and the floods are very much there going forward as well. National Adaptation Plan is a foundation for adaptation finance. Finance we can raise from domestic public finance side as well, international public finance, bilateral, multilateral funds, and international and domestic private funds. Carbon credits is another opportunity as a financial instrument if we can have an efficient market. institutional capacity is required to build the business case, and that's where the investment may be required at the same time. And NAP process required collaboration across different ministries and the departments. So just to summarize and close that one, a fiscal discipline is an important element within the disaster risk management. If we are able to identify the risk and quantify to reasonable level that what kind of funding or financing it may require to offset it, and how we are going to create that, this is a one governance factor which we have to incorporate there. We cannot have a plan which is not fully funded. We cannot have a plan which is not properly governed and executed. We cannot have a plan which does not have a monitoring, evaluation, and reporting mechanism. So from an adaptation perspective, adaptation finance perspective, National Adaptation Plan is the one, I think, where everybody has to contribute and complete that as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Over to you, Bilal.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sajid. Very, very clear and a very powerful message actually coming across. From a financial perspective, from your financial background, you very rightly you said that adaptation is the key for Pakistan, because this mess has Pakistan have almost no contribution to the global climate crisis, but we are the forefront of paying the price for it and facing all the impacts of it. Sajid, you very rightly said that adaptation and the financing for the adaptation is a moving target, because what we are seeing right now is all the development dividends, all the disaster risk management and measures which the government of Pakistan and other actors might have taken. This ongoing flood has actually pushed us many years back, and it has to be reinitiated, it has to be rekindled. So that, of course, is going to be contributed towards the cost for adaptation and the cost for, of course, disaster risk reduction and management. Now, you mentioned also about DRM. I'll talk a little bit about this after the next speaker. So, Dr. Shafqat Munir Ahmed Saab, we are very fortunate to have you today. And you are a very well-known professional in this particular field, coming from SDPI right now, one of our partner organization, and working very, very closely with SDPI. A wide range of experiences and expertise Dr. Saab have, and has been working in the disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management area for a number of years. Dr. Saab is going to be talking about political economy of DRR, DRM in Pakistan. Over to you, Dr. Saab.
Thank you, Bilal Saab. First of all, I would like to appreciate that you have started this series actually building the case of Pakistan for DRR and CCA. As long as my experience working in the region is concerned, I have been active since tsunami 2004 to the recent flood in Pakistan 2022. I have worked in almost more than 10 these big emergencies as a policy advisor for various international organizations where I have served. I have seen a lot of models in different countries in Asia where DRR has been a focused area for the government and for DRR management, which unfortunately we could not build in here in Pakistan. So picking something from my experience, and as I was part of as an observer, part of the Sendai framework negotiation in Japan. So what I have seen there, why things could not happen at Sendai, why a consensus document could not come up after intense negotiation in Sendai, why Japan as president has to issue a statement which is now known as Sendai framework, which is not a consensus document by all countries, only because of the presidential chair has to issue some of the document at the end of such conferences. So that's why there is no targeting is on countries, and countries have to decide at their own. But still, the Sendai framework is the latest framework which guide us. But why I'm mentioning it here, because the topic is political economy of DRR and DRM in Pakistan. I am referring to this because political economy I have seen working even at the negotiation level in Sendai. Many countries, for example, African countries, Asian countries, those who were not willing to chip in money in these efforts, and instead of waiting just for the response side as we usually do in development countries. So that's the background of my discussion, which I'll take forward. I will just give a glimpses of few slides. I will not run all the slides on background, vulnerability, and all these things, because we all know. But I will pick a couple of things, and then straight I will come on the DRR and political economy of DRR, so that we understand after Sajid Saab's presentation that we have to access adaptation finance. Somehow we have to club two things which are going parallel at the moment: climate change adaptation, DRR. These are going in two parallel stream. But when I was with Oxfam International in the Asia region, I have commissioned one research clubbing both together, and I have seen results in Philippines, how both work well when all the efforts or the actions under CCA or DRR were clubbed. So that's a case study as well. If we in Pakistan also look at, instead of taking these two streams separately, we should plug in both together, and we can get benefit. And third thread we can add to this is the loss and damages. Because at Glasgow also, I was there in Glasgow as well, there has been a debate that now loss and damage, and particularly in COP27, this issue will re-emerge, that the loss and damages should be compensated or should be seen as an entity in this discussion. So all the three together can build a strong case for Pakistan while we will be moving to COP27 in Egypt. Can you run the slide, please? This is just a backgrounder. See, well, Pakistan is vulnerable to all kind of disaster. List them, every disaster we have seen. We have seen that temperatures are rising, mean temperature is rising. We have seen our, the sea level rise reported, and many other things we have seen here. And Pakistan's risk at the risk index, we know that we are among the highly risk countries. Particularly, second slide, please. Next. I would like to draw attention on two of my last points here. One is about our agreements. We have since, if we look at the stream on the climate side, we are part of all climate deals, whether it was Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, even Glasgow Pact, we have submitted our revised NDCs. On the disaster side, right from the Hugo framework to the Sendai, we are part of it. Similarly, on SDGs, we are part of it. But the problem is that we have all these framework in place. But when we see our own institutional framework, we see some of the overlapping in institution. The debate is going on that DRR and CCA, climate change adaptation, should be mainstream in our development plans. But still, talks are going on, and I think some efforts are there. But we have to make some concrete efforts to mainstream these things in our planning to get the benefit out of it. So these, and similarly on strategies, documents, if you look at with this context, I would like to mention here, we have a DRR policy 2013. 2013 mean we have this policy based on the guideline provided in Hugo framework, which ended in 2015. Yeah. So after 2015, there is a new agreement here, which is Sendai framework. Sendai framework is more structured after deliberation and discussions. If you look at the very objective of our DR policy 2013, we have both proactive and anticipatory approaches for with special emphasis on risk assessment, prevention, mitigation, and preparedness, with the aim of creating a resilient nation. Now look at the change scenario, because this does not have attached with it any kind of funding commitment from the national side, from the national government and provincial government. This is just a commitment under Hugo framework. But looking at the HIGO frameworks reviews. I was part of the midterm or the end term review of the HIGO framework also. At that time, we felt that since there was no investment part attached to it, that's why it could not work. That is why in the Sendai framework, what is there? In Sendai framework, there are three very categorical things. It was not just assessment of the and prevention of the disasters. It was about understanding the risk out of these disasters. And we know, as Bilal Sahab in the intro also said, Sajid Sahab also mentioned, and we all, whenever we discuss this topic, we correlate it with the climate change. Climate change is not seen, it is manifested in form of the disaster which we have now facing. That's why the Sendai framework talks about, when it talks about the DRR, it talks about understanding the risk. Are we in a position that we have analyzed or visualized or proactively seen which kind of risk we have to see in future? Or even look at the recent floods. We have seen it here. Earlier, we were used to only the floods which were coming from upstream to downstream through the dams and the procedural way of the rivers. But now it is a southbound. The heavy monsoon rain played havoc in south, and southern part are inundated. Similarly, in the northern part, it was not because of that upward to downward kind of flood. It was the cloud outburst. So these kind of things are happening. So we have to basically focus on understanding risk. And then second major pillar of SFDRR is strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. So the governance part was not earlier mandated in HIGO framework in a categorical way as it is mentioned in Sendai framework. That's why Pakistan DRR policy 2013 needs to be updated according to the Sendai framework, which will put focus on the understanding risk. Secondly, the risk governance, which is very important for managing disaster and risk. And this is basically what I will, I will focus on the political economy. Political economy is surround around the governance of the risk and disaster management. And then third part of Sendai framework, I guess somebody has a mic open. Can you please close it? Yes, thank you. So the third part of Sendai framework is investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. Now we can see moving from HIGO 2005-15 and March 2015 onward 2030. So now we have clear laid down principles, three basic things: understanding risk, strengthening disaster risk governance, investing in DRR. So these are the categorical guidelines based on which we have to develop our policy, DRR policy. But since the issue of political economy comes into it, which I will later discuss after laying down these frameworks, and then I will discuss how these things are not prioritized here. Then if we look at the three basic thing, and then if you see the reinforcing pillars of Sendai framework, we see here the prevention and mitigation, preparedness, response, rehabilitation. These are all included in that part of things. The issue is that we are not actually giving much focus. We know that Pakistan is a climate change related disaster risk country. We have policies, we have national adaptation plan. Very good. We have revised NDCs. We have a 2013 disaster risk management DRR policy, which needs to be revised in the light of Sendai framework. Before the flood hit, my team and NDMA, we have been working on the midterm review of the Sendai framework to look at where we are standing at the moment as a country in terms of implementation of Sendai framework after 7 years. But because of the flood, we could not actually do much work on that. And hopefully when situation normalizes, we will do a review of that. As Mr. Bilal was mentioning in the beginning, that we have to look at the question, well, from where the, how can we think to fund and see DRR and DRM functioning rightly. And that could only be possible if we have a analyzed point of view, a real assessment. Only then we can go about that. So that will hopefully will be in future done. Now, if you look at the, there is a discussion around the recent losses, how much money we need for that. Initial estimate by the finance ministry, finance minister himself said $10 billion. Then where various ministers are on record that it could be much bigger. I would like to quote here the assessment which has been done by the World Bank after the 2010 floods. For these floods, certainly there will be assessment of it in later part of the year. But I would like to quote here World Bank's earlier assessment of the 2010 flood, in which it has been laid down, it has been clearly said that if in future any earthquake of 2005 nature or 2010 flood hit again in Pakistan, the losses could be more than $15 billion. So which means if you look at the scale of the next please slide, can you change the slide? Yeah. So if you look at the situation, we find that we need more than $16 billion for you know to repair the losses from these floods. And there are many other things which we have to do. These are only the response and rehabilitation side. It's not it doesn't include any DRR related things. So I will come on that after this. See now, in operation, we are having money from UN appeal is there, 161 billion. Let's see how the response plan responds to it and how the countries contribute to it. Individually, countries are contributing. US, UK, Canada, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and many other countries have contributed 500 million already pledged on PM's appeal. And there are other things, but the issue remains again here. When the temperature is rising and already reported overall temperature rise 1.2 degree already done. Temperature, mean temperature in Pakistan already reported 0.5 degree. In this situation, we should expect that these kind of floods, these kind of disaster will keep coming, and monsoon will be coming heavily more in future as well. But we have to do something in this situation where we have to see how we can cope with them, with the continuing things. Recent trends of the flood we have seen. 2010 was a slow onset flood which was passing through the traditional routes, but recent floods are not slow onset, they were fast onset. They damaged and destroyed everything. The flood came in from the Koh Suleiman hill torrents, from KP in other way, Sindh and Sindh and Balochistan, the monsoon. So all these patterns will continue, and maybe they will reshape themselves. So we have to prepare our case very strongly. Next, please. Next. Next slide, please. Yeah, I have already talked about Sendai framework and how we have to utilize the basic things which have been given in Sendai framework to update our DRR policy backed by resources. Only then we can reach that scale which Mr. Bilal and Sajid Sahab mentioned, that spending $1 in DRR is better than spending more than $7 or $15 in the response side. So that comes into that way. If we modify our policy, risk governance, understanding risk governance, and investment, backed by investment in the DRR plan or our policy. Now we are moving to COP27. In COP27, we have to build our case because these floods are now proven, and many scientific studies, IPCC reports are there. They correlate that these floods and these patterns, which I have just mentioned, various patterns, they have a correlation with the climate change. and climate change adaptation and DRR go side by side. That's why we have to build our case in a way that we club efforts for or the action for CCA and DRR together, and we build a case to access the finances as explained by Sajid Saab. I will not repeat on that. Next, please. Now, some of the costs, what we actually need now. I would quote here a figure that in Pakistan's provinces, all the provinces requested for 113 billion rupees, which is less than $500 million for 10 years to mitigate and prepare against floods. That amount you can see is much lesser than what we have the loss now. We are talking about a loss which may reach to 16 to 18 billion dollar. But look at this, the provinces asked for only $500 million to prepare against these kind of floods. But what happened during 10 years? Only 5.5 billion rupees, which is, hardly a few $1 million were disbursed in actual. And how can we expect for a DRR things? Here comes the point which will take me to the discussion on political economy. That's why I have gradually built the case for the political economy side of that. Floods are, floods should not be seen as a development subject. They are hazard, natural hazard. Anytime it can happen and can destroy our planning. Today I was reading in newspaper that over 100 billion rupees which were set aside for development, now they will be diverted to the flood response. If we have a regular DRR funding available in line with the Sendai framework, certainly we don't need to divert our regular development funds to mitigate or response to the flood. If we are well prepared, our communities are well prepared. So that's why the case of DRR is built, that why these monies could not go for DRR, and why only we wait for the floods hit and we only jump for the response and go for appeal for the world community to contribute. And even look at it, world community is also largely contributes when any emergency hit. Even in the regular DRR program, their funding is also not that sizable, which could be counted and which could attract the countries that they invest in DRR activities from these resources. Next, please. Next slide. Now, as I have already suggested, even that was the cost for DRR, which provinces has asked for. But here we agree that the adaptation cost is also between $7 to $14 billion. So these huge sums required, because climate adaptation needed because floods hit, and the floods and other disasters are manifestation of climate change. So if we correlate both DRR and CCA, that is my effort since 2013 Haiyan cyclone in Philippines, where I commissioned this paper. So I've been trying to push that we should look at these efforts and pool the resources on both counts so that we can build a resilient nation and we can prepare communities. I have seen communities in Philippines. Let me just quote here why we cannot do that. I visited a Brangaya, which is a union council type in Pakistan scale, where the cyclone hit. Immediately water receded, we went there. First interaction was with the local government. When I went to the local government office, can you imagine how raised it was? I have to climb over 20 stairs to reach to the local union council office, where there were contingent stocks there, and 24-hour response. Within 24 hours, they reach to their communities, because the union council is within the communities, and they have stocks at the raised platform, and even their offices are raised platform. Their schools are safe on raised platform. There are other public things are on the raised platform. That's why thousands of cyclone hit in Philippines every year, but they survive. Their resilience, their preparedness, and their DRR much better than other countries. So we also can see the reason I would quote here one of the recent report of the UNSCAP, which just released. Pakistan is second in 3 top countries in Asia Pacific in terms of the annual loss.
Dr. Saab, you have been muted. You are muted now. You're not audible.
Okay, sorry. So I was just quoting that Pakistan at the UNSCAP recent report says that Pakistan GDP, because of these the losses, because of the climate change and disaster, Pakistan GDP will be hit by 9.1%. And at the moment, the finance minister is on record saying that almost 4% of our GDP is already hit by this flood. And for ensuing floods and the impacts, UNSCAP report said the Pakistan will be among top 3 big countries who will be losing lot of resources. 26 billion Pakistan will be losing. Pakistan's annual average loss will be 26 billion. India's will be 225 because size of the country, and Turkey is 25. Look at this, even in the GDP percentage wise, Pakistan is behind Nepal, which has 8.7% according to this report. So this really alarms us to build our case to understand the political economy of DRR, and we have to really as a nation move forward so that we can build this case. Next, please. Now I'm directly coming to the end where we will be discussing the political economy side of it. So having said all these background things which I explained through my own experience and through the data available from the research sources, if you look at what we mean by political economy of DRR, precisely the political economy of DRR focuses or means on social science aspects or solution of disaster and disaster risk reduction or disaster risk management. Social science aspects. So when even in journal term, when we talk about economy or political economy, it automatically takes us to the 2 school of thought. One is the hardcore economists who only talk in terms of money and in terms of monetary things. But when we see the political economy school of thought, they always talk in terms of people, policy, money, all together, that the benefit of the economy should go to the people and policy should influence taking the people in the center of the state. That's the political economy side. Political economy approach explains the extent and pattern of human and property losses in disasters, urban resilience, it may be the at-risk population, how at-risk cities could be. There is a big debate now on urban resilient cities and how it's making cities smart, and the green cities discussions are there. They all fall under political economy of DRR. As for addressing such thing, political actions and will is required alongside economic resources. Why economic resources are not coming to DRR? Because political side, political will is important to allocate the money. Because money is allocated by the political governments in all the countries, not only in Pakistan. But if money comes from the political governments or the system, then certainly there could be any plan or vision which is not backed by resources cannot really bring good results, whether it's a DRR policy or DRR action plan or CCA action plan. Then the subject, political economy of DRR, deals with the role of land use management. We see how land use management is seen in Pakistan, We have seen Islamabad, part of Islamabad, drowned because of the heavy rains. Then building standard, we know how building standard, we have seen in Swat, Bahrain, how hotels, smashed within minutes. This is the building standards part. This again has a part of political economy, who decide to allow these buildings on a shady things or shady decision. Everything is political and political economy related. And then the environment management itself. How much money, look at our national budget or provincial budget, how much money is allocated for environment management? We can see what is the price.
Sorry to interrupt, but if I may just humbly say to conclude, so we can
Yes, I am concluding on a after this. I have just one slide on Pakistan case study on political economy. Then I am finishing.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, I realize it, but unfortunately, because of the topic, I wanted that at least the basic thing should go to the colleagues here. So the subject deal with all these things, standards, everything, DRR, and multiplying cutting factors. And then there are control regime, agendas, political agendas, and issues of accountability around. These are all political economy related issues when we talk about DRR. Next, please. Here is a case study. In 2017, Jennifer Bussell and Asim Fayaz did a study on political economy of DRR in Pakistan. That study is a very classic example. After 2010, 11 until 14 floods, they have analyzed that, and the study talks about the government capacity to prepare for and respond to natural disasters, floods, earthquake, and heat waves. The analysis found that several hypotheses described as start of the study were particularly relevant to explaining the extent of disaster preparedness and risk reduction. And if you look at this, the economic strength was cited the most number of time as the primary reason for Pakistan lack of investment in disaster preparedness. See, one is the resources, next is the political will. Last slide, next. Yeah. Second is the political. The same study talks about that the political political parties and political leadership, they always, according to this study, they consider some of the electoral benefit, that they feel that if there is a response, they will go and distribute things. And by the way, globally, there is a big debate on politicization of the humanitarian aid. So they feel more, empowered than when they will be distributing relief goods, and that is a direct interaction with them. And politically, they do not come on the disaster preparedness side. So that's how political economy functions. And that study was in 2017. I think after these floods, I would suggest whether SDPI or any other, if you can join with us, we can do another study to analyze where we are standing at the moment of political leadership, whether there is a change in their mindset to and their political economy approaches, whether to include more DRR related funding and plans backed by resources, or we still wait along for these kind of things go further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Naveed is a Muslim name. वो आइडेंटिफाई करने के लिए अपनी रीजन की वजह से वो नवीद रख देते हैं.
Sorry. Thank you, Ji. Thank you. बहुत शुक्रिया, और a very comprehensive presentation, and you made some very, very important and pertinent points about the political economy, which is all about the risk awareness and risk management in the DRR context. Quickly moving on to our next presenter, Ms. Aisha Khan, an old friend, a climate activist, and a writer and author, writing on several issues of climate change. Aisha is a very well-known name in the climate change circles in country as well as abroad. She is currently the chief executive of a Civil Society Coalition for Climate Change. Some very valuable work is being undertaken by CSCCC. Aisha, over to you. And if I can request, if you can conclude your presentation within 12 to 15 minutes, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Aisha. As always,
Okay,
loud and clear.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum everyone. And yes, thank you, Bilal. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bilal, for inviting me to be part of this very important conversation. We've been at COPs together for many, many years. So we share, the concern about climate change and how Pakistan frames its agenda at the international negotiations. Today, I'm going to frame my conversation in the human security context, and I'm going to anchor it in the socio-economic, socio-political realities of Pakistan and the region. This is a very appropriate time for this discussion because the climate case is visible. It's happening right in front of us. We can see the devastation, we can see the scale of the destruction, and the whole country has been jolted by it. This is actually a moment of reckoning. And it's a good time to reflect not just on floods. We've seen recurrent floods happen in Pakistan from 2010 onwards with greater frequency and intensity, but it's also a time to look at all the other disasters that will happen as a result of water abundance or water scarcity. So I'm going to not limit my intervention only to floods, but I'm going to talk about water and food security and some other issues that contribute to making the disasters that are happening and will happen in the future worse. Next, please. Both environment and climate change contribute to degradation. Both play a part in disasters. The only difference here is that environmental degradation can be managed at the country level. So we as a country then can take responsibility for it or be blamed for it. But the climate change related or induced disasters are not within our control or powers. They happen at a global scale and they require multilateral agreements and arrangements. Pakistan has presented its updated NDC, and we have said that we need anything between 7 to 14 billion annually for adaptation. So that actually shows the level of threat that we are facing. So if we leave the mitigation part alone and say we are a low emitter, and if we get 35% conditional support for mitigation, we will engage in it. That still doesn't take away the threat of the climate impacts happening to us and our response as a nation. Next, please. So this is actually a good opportunity right now because it's just before going to the COP to also fully understand who is behind these disasters, which countries are more responsible. Is the entire population of the planet now dependent on 7 or 10 countries who are holding the world hostage, because it's their emissions that are going to have an impact on the rest of the global community. So I think this is a good time for Pakistan to ratchet up its demand for climate justice and also talk a little bit more about loss and damage, because the kind of loss and damage that we have witnessed now, it's not abstract. It is real for the world to see that it's happening, and it's happening despite the fact that we are such a small contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions. Next, please. Yeah, climate change and natural disasters have been posing a threat to Pakistan, and that is because of our geography, our vulnerability, and the location that we occupy in South Asia. We are warming up more rapidly than the rest of the world. We have anticipated that it's going to cost us anything between 3.7 to 4 billion rupees of losses. So how do we respond to that? How do we cope with that? A lot of questions recently have been raised in the media about the level of preparedness by the government. Was the response adequate or not? But I would say that, there is really no country in the world that can actually be prepared to cope with this kind of a disaster. Nevertheless, what we can do to limit and reduce the impacts is to address the issues that are within our controls. For example, the people who reside in flood-prone areas, who build their homes in hazardous zones. So we have to look into some of these governance issues and land zoning issues and try to do what we can, because there's so much carbon now packed in the atmosphere that no matter what we do, we are going to have to face disasters in the next decade. So under a pessimistic scenario, if you take the impacts of pollution, flood, drought, heat, it could cause anything between 10 to 13% losses GDP annually by 2050. And if you look at climate damages, they will increase rural poverty by anything. I have a power outage here. Can you still hear me?
I can still
Yes.
hear you, Aisha. You can
Sorry
carry
about
on.
that. Yes,
We
sorry about
can't,
that.
we
My
can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, there I am back. So it will increase rural poverty by 8.4% by 2050, taking that as a relative baseline. Next one, please. This is just to share with you that if you look at the different kinds of disasters that have happened, other than earthquake, storm, drought, flood, extreme temperatures, epidemic, they're all related to climate change. And climate change is accelerating the disasters to take place. So we can see the number of people that have been affected, and given the increase in our population by 2040, 2050, and the intensity and frequency of these disasters, I think we need to be prepared for disaster risk reduction in a very serious manner. It's not something that we can afford to take lightly anymore. Next, please. The Pakistan flood situation, I think, is an eye-opener. We have 1/3 of the country that is underwater. We have 30 million people who have been affected. And we're not factoring the secondary and intergenerational losses into this. When we say that we need 10 billion for recovery, we're not looking at the social aspects, long-term economic aspects that will happen as a result of this. We've had the super floods in 2010, but this kind of event that has been happening after 2010 floods is supposed to be 1 in 1,000-year events, which has happened now, which essentially means that what climate scientists were saying earlier, they were predicting these kind of disasters to happen 30 years from now. They're actually happening now. So we have to fast track our response and preparedness in order to cope with this. Otherwise, it will put us back by decades. Next one, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Himalaya Karakoram Hindu Kush region, not because I work there, but because that is a vast cryospheric space that we occupy. That is the source from where we get water. And most of the disasters that we have are hydrometeorological in nature. So what happens in this space has a butterfly effect. It will have a cascading impact, and it will destroy lives, livelihoods, and have a rippling effect on the economy and disrupt supply chains. The resultant impacts will include food security, health problems, and lower productivity, and increase in anger and frustration in society. And that will have its own backlash. So we have to, I think, recognize that we live in this region, and this region provides livelihoods for about 270 million people directly and about 1.8 billion people indirectly. So that's a lot of people, a large number that we're talking about that will get affected. So when so many people get affected by disasters or scarcities, there is another social mechanism that is set in motion that creates conflict. Next one, please. Continuing the thread of this conversation, I just want to talk about the Indus Basin. The Indus is our lifeline. So many people, I think, don't know this fact that the Indus in its upper catchment draws 40% of its water from snow and glacial melt. Now, what happens with accelerated melting? It is projected that in the next 20 years, by 2040, due to the excessive heat, there will be accelerated melting. So what we can anticipate is more flooding, more intense flooding, because when volume and velocity combine together, they wreak destruction in water bodies. And that is what we are seeing. We will also have more intense precipitation patterns, and that will also create the problem. So we will have the flooding of the glaciers, and we will have water pouring from the sky. And we've just seen a glimpse of what it can do. So other than the Indus Water Treaty, so far, we don't have shared basin management in the region. Looking forward, I think to manage extreme events, study patterns of the cryosphere, hydrological disruptions, the impact of socioeconomic impacts of disasters, we will have to move towards climate collaboration in the region and address this issue from a regional perspective to strengthen resilience of the region as a whole. Next, please. Here's why taking a regional perspective is very important. Climate change is going to directly impact 800 million people by 2050 who live in South Asia. And climate change will impact on the economic growth in South Asia. So anything that happens in one country will definitely affect the other country, because we're talking about water here from the same shared resource, the HKH. We're also talking about disruption in this water and the consequences. So water is the lifeline for every country, and every country in South Asia is either an upper or lower riparian state. So what happens in one country will have a spillover effect in the other country. So collaboration, cooperation is going to be very, very important. We live actually in an interdependent world where independence is just a theoretical construct that defines the geographical boundaries that we live in. In fact, to build resilience, we need codependence, we need connectivity, and we need communication. Next, please. Here, I'm going to talk very quickly about some other kind of disasters that are waiting to happen. We've seen glimpses of the heat spikes in Jacobabad and other areas last year. But this is a climate hotspot report that was generated by the World Bank a few years back, in which they predict that 6 districts in Punjab and 5 in Sindh will have temperatures that will go so high that it will make survivability impossible. So we're looking at out-migration of nearly 40 million people. Where will these people go? Will the urban infrastructure of existing cities absorb them, have the municipal services, or will that create another urban crisis and disaster? Next one, please. Pakistan, it has a varied geography. It's a small country, but it has high mountains, it has plains, it has desert areas, it has coastal areas. Coastal areas will get affected by accelerated melting. And that is not just happening in our glaciers, it is happening in the Arctic poles also. So altogether, when the sea level rises about 2 meters, it's going to submerge and sea will encroach into inland areas. So this is very, very critical for Pakistan. We do have a very long coastline, and Karachi contributes about 14% to the GDP. So any changes that happen in this area are also going to disrupt manufacturing and the economy. Next, please. Water is a common denominator in human security. So according to the World Food Programme report, 43% of Pakistan is food insecure and 18% it suffers from acute food insecurity. If you look at the graph, it says that 80% of the farms are smaller than 5 hectares. That means climate change induced impacts are not going to be possible for small farmers to absorb. So when they move away, those who engage in agriculture, we are going to have another food security disaster. Famine is also a disaster. Drought is also a disaster. Hunger is also a disaster. Next one, please. We definitely need to change the agricultural patterns if we want to move forward in a sustainable manner and prevent a hunger crisis in this country. Agriculture has declined from 20 to 19% in its contribution to the GDP, but it still engages 43% of labor and it provides livelihood to 70%. Climate change will reduce the growing period. Heat stresses will have critical reproductive stages impact, and they will require more water as the soil gets drier. So Pakistan has to look at, what is it doing with its agriculture? It is a water-stressed country. Surface water flows are the same, but we are mismanaging water. Groundwater is suffering because we are over abstracting water, and 4 crops, major crops, account for 80% of the water. So can we say that we are a water-stressed country when we are misusing that water? Almost all the arable land is fully used. So we really, with a growing population, we don't have even enough land. And when we are producing the wrong crops in the wrong habitat, for example, growing sugarcane in cotton areas, it means that these crops account for 80% of the cropland and the yields are 15 to 20% below average. There are issues of equity also related to over irrigation and poor drainage, and they will cause other social problems. Next, please.
Asha, can I request to conclude because we're running out of time. Thank you.
Okay. So here I won't go into the details. I will just flash this slide for you to see the other vulnerabilities of our total population, of the engagement of women in the labor force, where we stand on the hunger index, gender gap, human development, what is our rate of stunting, and rate of urbanization, because all these factors will play a role when we are facing a disaster. They enhance our vulnerability and they reduce our coping mechanisms. Next, please. This is just a disaster management cycle, which really doesn't apply anymore to the kind of disasters we're facing in Pakistan, because we will not have time to recover and prepare before we will be hit by the next disaster. So it is going to be a series of disasters, and it could be it's floods this year, it could be droughts next year. So it could be heat islands the year after, it could be all of them simultaneously. So we are caught in this vicious trap. Next one, please. And I conclude with this because in moving forward, I think we need to apply perhaps the crisis slide to assess what we have done right and what we could have done better between 1947 and 2022. And if we want to plan a future trajectory in which we want to be an upper middle income country, what are the alternative pathways that we need to take? So, we need to consider all these things, which include political stability, which include social cohesion, which include the robustness of the economy in a country, decide or determine how well a country is positioned to cope with disasters. Because at the end of the day, Bilal, every country now in the world will be coping with some kind of disaster and calamity, and it will depend entirely on the resilience of the country to respond and preparedness. Right now, we don't see Pakistan very well situated in that aspect, and we all need to pool our strengths, resources, ideas together to see how we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Asha. As always, very, very elaborative, and you covered a whole range of issues which Pakistan is facing in the disaster context, and of course the Hindu Kush, up in the Hindu Kush region, which we are so much dependent. So many sectors of the economy are dependent on that, and some extremely remarkable work which your organization is doing there. Now, Aisha has left a very important question for all of us. Our trajectory, our pathway towards moving onwards from 2022, given the kind of disasters which we have been facing, and in all the likelihood which we are going to face in the coming years and decades. I'm sure that our next speaker, Mr. Raja Rehan Arshad, given his vast experience within the World Bank and other places, I'm sure that he's going to be giving us some responses and some answers to these very, very important questions. Before I request Raja Saab, I just want to highlight that within NDRMF, we're working on a range of interventions and activities. We have a climate change portfolio, and we have our classical disaster risk reduction component, but we strongly believe that the whole equation of disaster risk management that cannot be completed until we have the more innovative approaches towards it. So one evolving mechanism on which NDRMF is working is disaster risk financing, which is going to be kind of paving the way and instituting the risk insurance and the risk transfer mechanism, and eventually we'll be moving towards the disaster risk insurance for the economically backward communities, as well as for different sectors of the economy as well. So this is a kind of an evolving mechanism on which NDRMF is very passionately working, and will be updating and highlighting in our different events in future as well. But right now, I would like to request Raja Rehan Arshad just to give us their overview.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Greatly appreciate this opportunity. Distinguished speakers and distinguished participants, this is a real honor to be here to contribute to this very important debate and dialogue, especially in the context of the current flooding that is plaguing the country. Let me just introduce myself very quickly. My name is Raja Rehan Arshad. I just recently retired from the World Bank after 29 years. I was fortunate to be leading the World Bank assistance to the country and to the people in 2005 after the earthquake, $1 billion program, and we led the damage and need assessment. Then in 2010, we led the damage and need assessment, which I was leading on behalf of the World Bank. And then in 2011, I led the damage and need assessment. So I have a fairly good idea of what the previous presenters have talked about very, very appropriately and very eloquently. But at the same time, I also want to bring the global experience to bear on the previous presentations, because unless we see what the world is doing, although as my previous presenter pointed out that almost a few of the nations are contributing to the whole climate change problem and holding hostage the rest of the countries, but at the same time, we also need to learn from other countries to see how we can fend for ourselves. We cannot continue to rely on the outside world. We have to start facing the reality that whatever is coming down our way, we need to address it using our own resources. Of course, the assistance is always there, but we have to really bring convergence in our allocation of resources and according to plans so that we can deal with this issue. Before I start with the presentation, just wanted to touch on the chair's remarks before my presentation. Risk transfer is a great area to work on, but at the same time, we also know that risk transfer depends a lot on risk identification and on risk reduction. And unless we identify the risks, especially the risks related to natural hazards, risk transfer is really going to be in the infancy and will not take root. So we really need to focus on the risk identification and risk transfer aspects, and then in conjunction with that preparedness. So with that as a preface, let me just quickly move to the presentation. Next slide, please. I'm going to be talking about resilience in general initially, because we cannot divorce the larger definition of resilience from the focus of this webinar, which is climate change and disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction and climate change are part of the larger ecosystem, and that ecosystem is what is causing shocks and stresses. I'm not going to go through the definition. Most of you are already aware of this UN DRR definition, but they talk about hazards, and we are now looking at multiple shocks and stresses. There can be social shocks, and we see social shocks happening throughout the country, even in our own country. We see governance-related shocks, we see institutional shocks, we see service delivery-related shocks, and of course, most recent shock and the emanating stresses because of the COVID pandemic. So we cannot divorce any of these climate change and disaster natural hazards from these other shocks. Next, please. The main components of resilience are social resilience, economic resilience, and infrastructural resilience. And at the common denominator of all these are policies and institutions. This is extremely important to focus, because sometimes we just look at some aspects of resilience and not the whole holistic picture of resilience. And we cannot continue to shortchange resilience by just looking at bits and pieces of it. Next, please. Now, resilience matters. We look at urbanization that is happening at a very fast pace. Almost 60% of the global population is living in urban centers or peri-urban areas. We see conflict happening in different parts of the globe. Next click, please. And of course, we see climate change, which has been talked about by my previous presenters, and we are seeing it in Pakistan as we speak. We have to take all these different elements, because there is a nexus in all these elements. We cannot look at climate change without looking at urbanization, without looking at the conflict drivers which are present in every society, and we see them in Pakistan also. Next, please. And resilience matters especially for the children, for the vulnerable, for the people who are unwell, or they are ill, and people who are disadvantaged. They really need to be the center of any resilience plan and related to any kind of shock and stress. Next, please. Now let me come to the topic of the webinar, but again, it is more in terms of global experience, building the case for resilience. And I'm going to give some numbers, and please, there is a need to focus on these numbers, because these numbers tell a story. They tell the trends and patterns, which some of the previous speakers have also talked about. Now, disasters, they are, as we know, natural because of natural hazards, as well as they're man-made. And both of these categories, they cost lives and livelihoods. According to Munich Re, which, as you know, is an insurer, losses from natural catastrophes in 2020 rose to 210 billion globally, from 166 billion in 2019, an increase of 34 billion in just 1 year. Out of the deaths from weather, climate, and water hazards, 91% occurred in developing countries. And of course, our country experiences the brunt of these kind of tragedies. Since 1980, more than 2.4 million people and over 3.7 trillion have been lost to disasters. And the total damages are increasing by more than 800%, from 18 billion a year in the 80s to 167 billion a year in the last decade, which is a huge exponential increase. Academic studies have shown that every dollar invested in disaster risk reduction and prevention can result in savings of $3 to $15. Now, the chair talked about from $6 to $15. There are various studies which are reporting different figures, but generally we have a range, which is from $3 to $15. And these are just losses, the indirect losses. The damage to the physical infrastructure can be $1 to about $3 to $4. So you can see that this actually goes up to $20. Next, please. Building the case for resilience is something important, and I will use a few slides to just dwell on this. There is a need to look at resilient infrastructure, and in low and middle income countries, investing in more resilient infrastructure yields $4 in benefit for each $1 invested. Now we know, and some of the previous speakers have talked about this, that there is not enough investment being made in disaster risk reduction in our development investment. In our PC1s, in our development programs and projects, because there is a huge development deficit, all the allocation is for the development of the infrastructure or of any other aspect. There is no amount being set aside in that development activity for integrating disaster risk reduction measures. And that is why we are in this current situation where we have to face the same situation time and again. We are not investing enough in early warning. In just 24 hours warning of a coming storm or heat or even floods, we can cut the ensuing damage by 30%. And a very good example of this is India. As most of you are aware, in 1999, there was a cyclone in Odisha, India, and it killed almost 10,000 people. The same in Odisha, there was another cyclone Phelan, which came in 2013, about 14 years later. But because of the early warning system and the whole evacuation plans that have been developed, the people were, over 1 million people were moved to safe places, and only 40 people died in that hurricane, which was a Category 5 cyclone. So you can imagine the importance of early warning systems and then the associated SOPs that should be in place for evacuation. Next, please. Food insecurity, as we are currently experiencing in the current floods, this is a huge fallout of these kind of climate-related disasters. Climate services such as seasonal forecasts, drought advisories, and fire danger indices improve agriculture yields. And investments overall have a cost-benefit ratio of 1 to 10. Imagine it's 1 to 10, it's no small ratio. Similarly, risk reduction measures at farm level can yield many economic, social, and environmental benefits. In Zimbabwe, we've seen farmers using drought-tolerant maize, and that was able to invest up to 600 kilograms more maize per hectare than with conventional maize. Now, we know that there are fragmented approaches being tried out in Pakistan as well, but we are not looking at this challenge in an integrated manner, and I'll come back to that in the recommendations later on. Our previous presenter, Shafqat Munir, talked about urban resilience, an extremely important area because almost 55 to 60% of the population is living in urban areas. Trees and vegetation can lower local land temperatures by up to 5 to 6% on days of extreme heat, and we are going to face some spots in Pakistan where there are going to be heat spikes, as was pointed out by the previous presenter. And this is something that we need to focus on in the context of urban resilience, where other shocks and stresses are also playing out. And we need to look at urban resilience in a very integrated, multi-sectoral manner. We cannot look at urban resilience only in the context of climate change and natural hazards. Next, please. The cost of inaction is something that the chair talked about at the outset. Research suggests that the cost of climate change is widely underestimated, and this is something that our previous presenters have pointed out. The number of people in need of humanitarian assistance as a result of storms, droughts, and floods could climb beyond 200 million annually by 2030, compared to an estimated 108 million today. So we are looking at doubling of this in the next 8 years. The rising human toll would come up with a huge financial price tag, with the climate-related humanitarian costs ballooning to 220 billion per year by 2030. This is quite astronomical. Failing to implement better water management policies could result in regional GDP losses from 2 to 10% by 2050. And this, of course, is in addition to famine and just sheer unavailability of basic food needs. The worsening impact of climate change could displace 140 million people within their country borders by 2050. Now, this is a huge challenge. This slide itself should be waking us up. It's a wake-up call. Next, please. I won't go through this in detail. Hazard risk has 3 different kind of drivers to it. One is the natural hazard, which causes the hazard risk, and climate change is a very important natural hazard. Then we have vulnerability, and then the exposure of that vulnerable population. And unplanned land use is a classic example that we see in Pakistan. Next, please. Please, I'll skip the slide. Next, please. Now, I'll come to what can we do now that we are experiencing a major flood, unprecedented flood. We all have heard of building back better. And resilience has to be seen as a multi-sectoral and multi-challenge agenda in building back better. Now, while we have witnessed substantial progress on disaster risk reduction, but unfortunately, it's only when a disaster happens that we get the attention of the political presence, the decision makers, and also the international community. And that is why we need to convert this adversity into an opportunity and really use the 2022 floods to improve the situation so that we don't have a similar disaster, especially the loss of human lives, and then of course the indirect losses and the damage to physical infrastructure again. Next, please. Now, I talked about converting adversity into an opportunity. According to Priority 4 of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, adopted in 2015, and I was there, and I heard Shafqat Munisa was there as well. Reconstruction offers an opportunity to build more resilient societies, and this is what we should be really trying to aim for. And this is characterized by looking at the following risks, with new buildings located outside flood zones and with structures designed to resist high winds. Look at where we are. We have seen a disaster happen and it's still panning out. And we made the same mistakes that were highlighted in the 2010 damage and need assessment after the floods. We still continue to construct buildings in flood zones right next to the banks of rivers, and we know what happened, especially in the mountainous areas and also in the plain areas. And we need to, the main access infrastructure like roads, bridges, and electric grids, they need to be made resilient so that they can endure the next storm. And human settlements that provide a better quality of life and enable higher productivity. Such a resilient recovery can reduce the impact and the cost to well-being associated with future disasters. Next, please. This is a framework which I will not go through in detail. I'll just come, I have only a minute left, so I'll just come straight to looking at the 2010 floods and the current floods. Please, if you can skip this slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. I will focus on this slide. We have to build back faster. We cannot take years and years to build back. And for that, I have one recommendation or a couple of recommendations at the end. Next, please. If implemented together, these three strategies, which is rebuilding stronger, faster, and more inclusively, could generate major benefits totaling 173 billion per year globally. Next, please. Now, this is my last three slides. This is the summary table of the 2010 floods damage and need assessment, which was conducted by the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, EU, UN in support of the government. And we see at the bottom right, the total damage was $10 billion, something that Dr. Shafqat Munir also referred to. Next, please. And this is where we see at the bottom, the reconstruction needs, the bottom right corner, which was around $9 billion. This was reconstruction option 3, which was for a fully resilient reconstruction effort. So we were looking at almost $9 billion of reconstruction. Next, please. What we did not look at during the period after the flood was to really start implementing the recommendations that were made for disaster risk reduction and resilience in the 2010 flood damage and assessment. Now I'll give you an idea. The total reconstruction option 3 was $9 billion. Generally, the disaster risk reduction and build back better percentage is 12 to 15% of the total reconstruction costs, which means that the total cost for resilience in the $9 billion envelope was around 1.35 billion. Academic studies, which I've quoted before, show that every dollar spent accrues savings of $3 to $15 in disaster losses. Therefore, if we had spent the 1.35 billion, then our savings would have been close to or in the range of $4 to $15 billion. We would not have lost the number of lives we've lost in this disaster. The assets that we've lost, we would not have had them to the extent that we have seen the damages, and we would not have had the indirect losses to the same extent. Look at the amount, $4 to $15 billion of savings we could have accrued, in addition to, of course, the saving, the lives that could have been saved. Next, please. So this is the, I've cut and pasted this from the housing sector chapter of the damage and need assessment. A significant part of the affected housing stock is situated within the 50-year floodplain of the Indus River, adopted as the flood hazard area for the purpose of this report. Such housing, if reconstructed in situ with the same materials, mainly mud, and to the same standards as before, remains at significant risk during its useful life. This risk is even greater for houses located within the 5-year floodplain. We made the same mistakes. We constructed the same disaster just because we did not have a uniform policy for housing, and we did not articulate and notify that policy so that people, even when they started reconstructing, that they were reconstructing in a resilient manner. The last slide, please. Next one. So the recommendations are, we really need to conduct a comprehensive damage and assessment as rapidly as possible in a matter of weeks and not months. And we should start it now. We cannot wait. We need to use remote sensing tools, which are now widely being used throughout the world. We don't need to gather or collect data from the ground. And using remote sensing tools like satellite imagery, social media analytics, anonymized cell phone data, nightlight imagery, etc., we can conduct these assessments in a matter of 2 weeks. In parallel, we need to start developing a recovery framework, which presents a prioritized, integrated, multi-sectoral and multi-spatial recovery and reconstruction plan and strategies. We need to mainstream disaster risk reduction and resilience measures in the recovery and reconstruction efforts and investments, and then, of course, in the development agenda as well. We need to articulate and notify uniform sector recovery strategies urgently. The example I gave, people are already reconstructing homes, and they are reconstructing them the same old way, and they are reconstructing disasters. We need to help them to reconstruct in a resilient and disaster risk resilient manner. Finally, we need to have maximum coordination. We see so many different civil society players, NGOs, INGOs, even the donors, just doing their own in a fragmented manner and not coordinating with the government. This is another recipe for disaster. And my request to the policymakers is, please start coordinating all the efforts, as was done in the 2005 earthquake, which is still considered as one of the best recovery and reconstruction efforts globally ever done. And Pakistan should take pride in that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Saab. Very interesting, and you have actually covered many important points, and I covered them in the context of the different financials and cost aspects of it. Your last couple of slides actually did struck with me, and I'm sure with the other participants as well. 1.35 billion of the incremental DRR component of the cost for reconstruction would have resulted into 4 to 15 billion of pure savings. And we're not talking about the livelihood lost, and we're talking about the lives lost, and then of course the indirect losses as well, by losing all the development gains and everything else. So these numbers are startling. These are very self-evident numbers. In the present context, in which we are in right now, the damage assessment work is being carried out, and of course the gravity and the scale is much bigger now. We're talking about, when 33 million people are being adversely affected, and then the number of houses is, I think it runs around 16 or 17 million. I think the bill is going to be quite massive. And I happen to be sitting in few meetings. I know that with the numbers which are being floated out, they range from 16 billion to around 22 billion US dollars as a damage assessment to houses and the public infrastructure. This is a big figure in the context of the economy of the Pakistan. And when we translate into the GDP losses, I think some numbers have been done, and we have seen the numbers from the finance minister. I think it is going to be even a lot more higher than that. So the case for, as you very pointedly stressed out, the case for resilience building is self-evident. It's very much there. And unfortunately, we're becoming a country, we're becoming a nation which actually lives from disaster to disaster. But nevertheless, we haven't been able to really learn a lot from our previous experience, as well as from the experiences of other countries who have gone through this very similar. I know that there has been a very live chat and discussion which has been going on, and I'm sure there are a number of questions with the participants. I was reading from the chat, and some of the very pertinent issues and the points which are being raised by the participants, they actually run into some of the aspects which Aisha mentioned about loss and damage. Similarly, the participants are stressing the need for this more comprehensive and inclusive planning, which need to be there. And I think several participants made the point about a very kind of a comprehensive pre-disaster arrangements, which again are missing, and they have been largely not put into place after the previous disasters as well. I would like to open the floor for some questions. I know we have overstepped our time, but I think since very valuable and pertinent points have been made in several presentations, and seeing the interest from the floor, I think we should enter into some dialogue and interactive session here. So anyone who wants to take the floor, I can already see some hands. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I am Dr. Fayaz. I have been Director General in Earthquake Reconstruction Rehabilitation Authority in looking after the recovery process. I am very pleased to really listen to eminent scholars and the people who have been working intimately in disaster risk management cycle. My rather comment would be that we would have to plan our recovery process very deliberately. I have an experience, I have seen that our recovery process still, we have not been able to cross 80% in 2005 earthquake, because the vision which we should have made was not correct vision at that very time. We made a vision, and the resources which were needed were much more than what could we afford. Today, if we have to take a snapshot of the future which we want of this very flood affected area, that vision should be crisp and clear. And according to that vision, we need to do the planning. And then based on that planning, we need to mobilize resources. If our vision, planning, and resources are incompatible, we will face the same very fate which we are facing at present in KPK and AJK. So this is my message. I have been a special capacity building expert in National Disaster Management Authority. Also, I led National Institute of Disaster Management, and I brought this discipline to Pakistan from Thailand when I was Commandant Military College of Engineering as part of NIST. So I can very passionately recommend that the recovery process should be deliberately done, and NDMA should lead it. NDMA should lead it, not the NDRMF, because NDRMF is only seeing at the financial component. The complete spectrum would be seen by NDMA. That's my humble recommendation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's a very valid point, and we really appreciate your inputs and view. Just to clarify that NDRMF is not actually involved into the relief efforts as far as what is going on right now. Now, in the rehabilitation and reconstruction, especially at the reconstruction phase, we are actually foreseeing our role there, and we believe that given the expertise and the experience and the financial resources which we can mobilize, we see that we can actually be a very effective partner with the other agencies who actually have a lot more experience on the ground. So our role is going to be very much focused and restricted to the providing the financing and arranging the additional financing for that work. Now, also I just want to inform the audience here as well that given the gravity and the criticality of the ongoing disaster, NDRMF have provided to the government $150 million US, and this funding is going to be utilized for the relief efforts. And we understand that this funding should actually it's needed right now on the ground, and while at the same time we are engaged with a lot of donors, international community, to come up with additional financing for the reconstruction rehabilitation work, as well as planning for this long-term DRR, DRF, and climate change components. So we're not losing the focus, and we fully appreciate and understand our responsibility there. There is a Ismail Khan Saab from PDMA KP.
Yes, sir. I will add just to the Raja Rehan Saab presentation. Actually, we here at PDMA, we are in the state of war. We can say that we are in response. More of the international communities, international partners reaching us for the overall impact of this flood, which affected the whole of the Pakistan and especially the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. One way, as someone has mentioned, that there are the damage database is here. Yeah, we have the damages, the losses, the deaths, the injuries, the sectoral losses. But unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have any estimation of the indirect losses of this flood. In 2010 flood, the World Bank has done a very good exercise, which cater all the aspects of the damages in terms of the impact, which are the direct losses and indirect losses. And at the moment, we are desperately needed those that type of assessment. So I think it will be a request from our side to the relevant organization like World Bank to start the process of the impact assessment of this flood, please. One more thing which I can guess is that the impact of this flood in our region in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is much higher than the 2010 flood, because it was a slow onset and we with high velocity, and we did not find any time to safeguard our infrastructure and assets. So this is one of the submission from my side, please.
Thank you very much, Ismail Saab. Anyone from the panel who want to quickly respond? So basically, some useful points from their side with regard to the impact assessment work, and some experience, of course, rests with NDMA and PDMA with regard to the 2010 floods. But the assessment methodologies and the technology, as Raja Saab in the last presentation mentioned, have really evolved since then. So I think we should be able to come to a more realistic assessment. But anyone who wants to quickly respond?
Chair, this is Raja Rehan Arshad. Can I respond?
Please go ahead.
Both the participants have asked very relevant questions. Just in response to the comment that has been made by the first participant, he is spot on, because he has experienced what it takes to plan recovery and then implement recovery in a sequenced, prioritized manner. That is why he's advocating for a very comprehensive recovery plan. In my presentation, I referred to the damage and needs assessment, and then I referred to the disaster recovery framework. That is basically what we need in this situation. Now, as the chair, as you know very well, there is never enough money for recovery and reconstruction. And that is why we need to prioritize the critical interventions across sectors and across the space meaning wherever the floods have affected, and across the population, so that we can use the limited resources in a very prioritized manner and in a very balanced manner across the sectors, because we cannot look at recovery and reconstruction in fragmented silos along the sector lines. We have to have an integrated approach. That's why the disaster recovery framework. The second point that our colleague from PDMA, KPK made, absolutely spot on again. Right now, they are in a war footing kind of area. And they're dealing with the floods, with the relief, emergency rescue, etc., and then also dealing with the donors. The donors are coming to them. Again, this is where coordination is needed. But although they are collecting data, the PDM is with support of the line ministries and the local governments and the municipalities, they are collecting data, but it will take time. I was heading the global program for disaster risk and reduction, resilient recovery in Washington, in headquarters World Bank. And I've seen these kind of floods happen in so many different countries. It takes weeks and weeks to collect damage data. Why waste that time? Why not use satellite imagery, social media analytics, anonymized cell phone data, nightlight imagery, and so many other tools that are available to collect damage data? And they can also collect indirect losses, the point that was made by the PDMA colleague. So let's look at these. I've used them in my capacity in the World Bank in headquarters in so many countries. Why can't we use them in Pakistan? Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ji. We have another colleague, Sultan Mahmoosa from UNWFP, I believe.
Thank you very much, sir. Assalamu alaikum. And Bilal Sahab, our tributes to your wonderful programs that we have been seeing for past 2 months. It has been boosted up, and this is sharing knowledge, helping us learn more. So wonderful work by NDRMF. Yeah, the question actually I wanted to ask is, it's in 2 pieces. Arshad Saab is here to, maybe he would be able to guide us on that. Number 1, I think there is a need that we have a standardized and agreed tool to integrate DRR, DRM into all sectors during all phases, whether it is emergency, development, recovery. So this is the first thing. Do we have anything available? If not, could that be taken care of so that we have a standardized integration approach? Second part of my question is, what I've seen is that people in the villages, we could see from the social media, those people who had some ropes and some knowledge, they threw those ropes and then saved few lives of those who were in the middle of the flood water. So they rescued them, and some lost their lives. So, and this rain happens, it comes back and forth. I still feel that there's a need that we focus on DRR, emergency preparedness, even during relief phase. Because this rain comes in pieces and in frequencies, and what happens is that some lose their properties, and some who are evacuated, they're taken to camps. Now in camps, even while being in camps, there are risks, there are hazards. They may again be focused upon, and maybe we could train them how to do firefighting, others. I mean, some basic emergency preparedness while being in relief phase. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would need a guidance from Arshad Saab and other experts on how to integrate this, or whether to integrate this emergency preparedness even during response phase. Over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sultan Saab, and thank you for your kind words for what we are trying to do through these webinars. Sharing is one component of it, but I think the bigger component is learning, and learning from those experts who are out there in the field, and they are a lot more knowledgeable and experienced than us. So anyone who wants to take both questions?
Can I respond on the campsite?
Ji, please.
I want to ask, please.
Shafqat Sir, please go ahead.
Ji. I think the camp management is a very technical issue in response, and even after response, the rehabilitation thing. There are set standards on camp management, how to make security of people in camps possible, particularly the security of women and children. But you know what we see from the 2022 flood, there is no as such camp management is seen, which is a risk, as pointed out by Sultan Saab. So we can replicate all the standard which we have used in campaign management in 2010 and after 2005 earthquake. And then there is on the DRR, continuing DRR and DRM within response. Yes, there are such structures there, and there is a cluster system which can be revitalized now, because a lot of players are working here and many have left the country because of the restriction on INGO. So again, that can be reactivated. So that could be helpful. Ji, over.
Thank you, Dr. Shafkat.
Can I, Mr. Chair, can I respond, because the speaker did address me for the question. So is it okay if I respond? Hello?
Sorry, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I think the question that was asked about the DRR in all sectors through some kind of a standardized approach. This is extremely important because we cannot continue to fragment disaster risk reduction the way we cannot continue to fragment recovery. The point I made earlier. So it's an excellent point. And there are frameworks available. Now, as Sultan Musab, you will recognize that each sector would have its own disaster risk reduction strategies and interventions, short-term, medium-term, long-term. But the framework is very simple, and this is the framework which is present in the disaster recovery framework. There are 4 pillars of this framework and for disaster risk reduction. One is institutional. Disaster risk reduction is not just about the tangible or the brick and mortar risk reduction. It's about how to also make the softer side of disaster risk reduction resilient. This includes the people, the question that you asked about the camps and how they were throwing ropes to save other people. The people need to be made resilient. That's part of the institutional side. The institutions responsible for disaster risk reduction, they need to be made resilient and they need to, please excuse me, there's a light, the power outage has happened over here. Then the second is policy. You have to have a uniform policy for disaster risk reduction, which each sector can then adopt and then tailor the interventions and according to the sector specific needs. Third is financing. Unless you have financing and you know what level of financing is available, there's no point in coming up with interventions. And the final one is implementation. No matter how much planning you do or how much policies you have, if the implementation is not right in a standardized manner, then it's not going to happen. Standardized basically means in a multi-sectoral and multi-spatial manner. And on the camps, my only plea is, and those who were involved in the 2005 earthquake will bear me out, camps are the only place where the displaced can be taken if they don't have other places like host communities to live with. Camps have to be managed extremely carefully because of the risks associated with camps. And camps should be only there for as short a time as possible because they create dependency and they create other security risks. So camps should not be proliferated for years and years. They should be only there for a few months, and people should be encouraged, motivated to return back to their areas of residence so that they can start rebuilding their homes and lives. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very important point you made at the last bit about the camps. I think it's extremely important that people are motivated and encouraged to return to their normal lives, and that of course can avoid a lot of kind of socioeconomic challenges which society and community can face on these places. We have several hands up, so let me take a couple of questions. Let me club them together. So can we ask Mr. Ali Jabbar first, and then Engineer Abdul Qayyum Saab, If you can ask your question, and then we'll ask our panelists to respond. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum, sir. I'm Ali Jabir Malik from APP. May I ask my question?
Please go ahead.
Sir, I had a question to you, sir. Since the inception of NDRMF, I was part of that launching process. I saw that many NGOs, donor agencies, government agencies, they applied for the accreditation of NDRMF. The process was very elaborate and you can say a capacity building kind of initiative that led organizations to improve their capacities and knowledge about DRM, DRR, and how to manage finances during their interventions on ground, either they were related to environmental conservation or disaster management. Do you think that process of NDRMF helped the provincial authorities to develop their capacities to perform a response better in disasters like the prevailing floods? And what is the update on that? How many agencies have been registered right now? And what was their response to your accreditation processes? Because it was really lengthy, elaborate, and at times very difficult for them to manage their accreditation procedures. So what is the update on that? Please comment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ali Saab, Ali Jabir. So, well, first of all, yes, you're absolutely right. And this is kind of a prevailing wisdom out there. Whoever went through our initial accreditation process, and there were a number of challenges they face, and especially there's a standing comment. I wouldn't say criticism, but a standing comment that the process was very lengthy. It was extremely robust, and of course, resulting into some kind of negative impacts for some of the entities who have not been able to pass through. Now, I mean, just to give you, I think it's very hard to justify the cumbersomeness or complexity of the process. But when it comes to the accreditation, I think we all have to understand that it has a purpose to serve, and any accreditation system is designed fit for that purpose. Since we are custodian for the public money, and we were extremely cautious and judicious that we are helping the entities or the NGOs to establish and to strengthen their systems to handle the public money, to undertake the management and the social safeguards, a number of other aspects. We have 15 of those entities which managed to pass through the process, and many of them are actually very successfully they are implementing the projects. Of course, we have learned in the last 3 years, and we have refined that process and revised it. And one key component of it is to streamline the process without actually losing the robustness of it. But the whole capacity building, which you mentioned as well, the capacity building component has been increased and enhanced tremendously. So going on, we're going to relaunch the accreditation process very, very soon. So going on, actually, we'll be helping and we'll be extending our hand to all those entities to pass through the accreditation process, because we believe that this is the one job which and the one duty which you have to perform out there. So I hope this answers your question. Can we go to the next, Mr. Abdul Qayyum Saab? Please unmute yourself. Abdul Qayyum Saab, unmute yourself. Okay, there seems to be some problem with that. Can we go to the next question, which is FPCCI Peshawar? Sardar Muhammad Sabji, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
It's a very excellent discussion going on. मैं दो चार जो मेरे एक दफा मैं चताल भी रहा हूँ और मैं भी एक विषय का कोऑर्डिनेटर भी हूँ। यहाँ की रिस्क मैनेजमेंट के हवाले से और जो है डिजास्टर रिकवरी के हवाले से DRR के हवाले से काफी बातें हुई होती हैं। हम कम्युनिटी के साथ डायरेक्टली काम करते रहे हैं। चित्राल में भी शौकत अली साहब ने 15-20 साल पहले एक काम बड़ा आसान सा काम किया था कि उसने केपीके में फॉरेस्टेशन पे 15 साल की पाबंदी लगाई। सबसे पहले सारी अच्छी डिस्कशन है। नंबर एक ये है कि 15-20 साल के लिए इस तरह पाबंदी अगर लगेगी तो उससे काफी हमें जो सैलाबों से बचाव का सबसे आसान तरीका हमने अडॉप्ट किया है। इसके अलावा भी चतराल में हीट लैंड भी है, वेस्ट लैंड भी है, वेटलैंड भी है और फॉरेस्ट लैंड भी है। और सबसे ज्यादा जो हमें जो प्रॉब्लम क्लाइमेट चेंज के हवाले से जो ग्लेशियर और बर्स्ट हो रहे हैं और उस हवाले से सिलसिला इस तरह है कि हमारे पाकिस्तान में गवर्नमेंट का और सूबों ने अभी तक इन्वायरमेंटल पॉलिसी नहीं बनाई, ग्रेजिंग की पॉलिसी नहीं है। पार्टनर्स में लोग जो आपने देखा जो डिस्ट्रक्शन हुई है वो सारे आपने नालों के अंदर आपने घर बनाए हैं, आपने कोई प्लानिंग नहीं है। इस हवाले से अगर हम सारी चीजें आप लोग की सही है, आप लोग की सारे एक्सपर्ट बैठे हुए हैं, लेकिन हम चाहते हैं कि जब मैं मेयर था तो मैंने वो किया, मैं वो क्या है डेटा कलेक्ट करवाया। 60,000 फीट हमारी 7 लाख फीट वो प्रोटेक्शन वाल बनी थी। जब अभी अगर आप एसेस करने कि पिछले 15-20 सालों में जितने प्रोटेक्शन वाल बने थे अभी भी उसमें 10% प्रोटेक्शन वाल आपको नजर नहीं आते। इसलिए जी हम सैलाब के बाद जो रिकवरी के लिए अल्लाह रसूल का नाम लेके दौड़ते हैं, क्यों ना हम इससे पहले इसकी प्रिवेंटेशन पे काम करें। इस हवाले से चतराल में इंडिजिनस जो हमारे पास जो नॉलेज है उसमें है, उस हवाले से अगर हुकूमत पॉलिसी डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल तक भी बनाए और सूबों को भी इम्प्लीमेंट करें। अभी खासकर पीडीए में या एनडीए में रिकवरी के हवाले से लोगों को मदद करने के हवाले से पहले से 15-20 सालों में इन्होंने काफी इम्प्रूवमेंट की है, लेकिन मैनेजमेंट साइड में हमारी पॉलिसी है सिफत है। आइंदा सालों में हमने मुश्किलात से हमने दो चार होना है। इसलिए भी दरख्वास्त हमारी है कि जंगलात की कटाई पर पाबंदी लगे, सस्ती एक्चुअल रेट पे चतराल में, सवात में, शांगला में, जो वो गिलगित में यहाँ एक्चुअल रेट में लोगों को बिजली मिलेगी और एक कंक्रीट पॉलिसी बने, उस पॉलिसी के तहत मजबूती से अडॉप्ट किया जाएगा।
Thank you very much. बहुत शुक्रिया. Very valid point, and I think you could not have made it more strongly and forcefully. I would ask my panelists. Aisha, would you like to? You have an experience from the field, and you've been working with the communities. I think हमारे colleague ने Dr. Sardar साहब ने बड़ा अच्छा point here raise किया. What is, if you would like to add, how do you see it? And I'm sure that you completely agree with it as well.
I think that, when we talk about disaster risk reduction in mountain regions, we need to have a different approach to that because we're dealing with a very fragile ecology over there. We're also dealing with, people who live in remote areas in isolated clustered habitats. So providing them with relief and rescue operations is also much more difficult than it is in the plain area. So I think afforestation where it is possible, because in some of our high altitude areas, especially where I work in Baltistan, it is dry, arid ecology. It's not possible, but towards the Chitral side, certainly it is possible. And I think a policy where you ban tree cutting or have reserved forest areas and actually enforce that, because I think that is the missing link over here. We make policies and we don't actually have enforcement ability. So afforestation and nature-based solutions will be very important and play a critical role in safeguarding the lives, livelihoods, and the ecosystems of these mountainous regions in Pakistan.
Thank you. Raisa, any input from your side?
Niji, I think Madam Aisha has responded very appropriately. Nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question. Let's see if our colleague Abdul Qayyum, Engineer Abdul Qayyum Sahab, can you hear us, sir? You need to unmute yourself. You're muted.
Unmute करें sir अपने आप को.
आप नहीं कर सकते ना? तो नवीद अतर शेख साहब question.
कयूम साहब अपने आप को अनम्यूट करें सर।
अनम्यूट करें जी, अपना माइक खोलें आप।
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I from 2006 am trying that our hydel system, which is very inefficient, should be 80% efficient. That is, we should get the sun energy in our mobile, in our transport, in our household, and all grids. This is being done since 1890, and I'm struggling for this. I had a presentation in International Energy Conference, and then they wrote to Chairman Wabda, then Chairman Wabda, Shakil Durrani Saab, and he asked all the consultants in Pakistan that Mr. Qayyum is saying this. Then we had a comprehensive presentation to Chairman Wabda. I think I've shared. Then a lot of work was done within Wabda, and a pre-feasibility was proposed at that time. But due to one or the other reason, we are not getting sun energy, and now international hydro plants donors are in contact with me on Thursday 8:30. They have a meeting with me. They just want that your government should not create hurdles, and I myself has faced hurdles. For example, I was the contract specialist as a structure specialist at Dasu Islamabad transmission line, and there what they did when I joined, that was an EPC contract. And EPC contract means you have to tell the contractor that underground conditions are this, how you get the value, so that you come competitive bidding. But nobody was listening. Then I asked World Bank, wrote a letter to Wabda, and World Bank, they came there and they said, oh, you are doing an EPC contract on Red Book, how it is possible? Then they asked me to get the investigations, and then we added that. But at that time, a lot of public money was wasted. The second experience is I was in contact team leader at Islam Garage. We have polluted all the groundwater. This is engineers' fault that they don't have the know-how about this. I added a specification that for water concrete ACI 50-20. Then we got the even the DESCON, which is very important. And I asked you use this concrete so that air, underground water, or adjacent things are not disturbed. Rather, they want to uplift the people all over the world. Now they take that all the world, including Pakistan, even my office, this is one plan, this needs one plan. There should be no poverty, no hunger. And even our sustainable energy and water solutions. And they have a meeting tomorrow on Thursday. They are ready to give you the capacity building, all financing. The other is global sustainable technology and innovation communities. They previous years gave 1,050 million euro, just the people who presented them their plan. And now I shared with you Fundal. Fundal is another very company. They have asked me that you find the people, we are ready to help you just sustainability. And what happened in Islamabad, I asked the contractor, the irrigation deposit, found it difficult to take these things as a test case. What is doing WAPDA, what is doing irrigation? These are big hurdles.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Abdul Kim sahab, बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. We recognize and we noted your point. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there are a number of challenges which are, of course, which are there, and we have to work with the government authorities and the government institutions.
And above this, that the government should adopt the UN sustainable goals through their parliament.
Sure.
Then there will be no problem. We can reverse all the cases in 2-3. There's no problem of finance. Only is the acceptance of that sustainable. I'm making a paper that what sustainable development goals and our Quran are similar, and there is no difference. Our charity, I will share, I think, today 3, and this is with me. What is happening now? This I said in my paper in 2017. You can check what is happening, what will happen if we don't open our eyes. I'm ready to help anywhere voluntarily, really.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ji. बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I mean, it's time to thank you, everyone, especially our panelists. They've done a remarkable job, and several very important and pertinent points actually brought to our attention, ranging from the political economy of disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management, all the way down to the practicalities of what is needed to be done in terms of having the DRR components and the strategies to be implemented, especially in the context of this ongoing flood. So I must say that I'm really humbled. Our entire team and NDRMF is humbled to see your enthusiasm, your participation, and as one of the participants said, that these sessions are becoming quite a phenomenon now in the country, and several participants are actually coming together and they're coming forward for their views and for their contributions. So thank you to all of you. This was the 4th webinar in the series of 5 webinars. Our last of this series is disaster risk management in Pakistan, challenges, lessons, and innovations. We agreed on all the topics actually a couple of months ago, or even more than that. But seeing the relevance with the kind of disasters which Pakistan is facing, they're becoming very pertinent, becoming very relevant to the needs of the hour. And I think the next webinar again is equally important and equally valid and relevant. I think maybe in a couple of weeks' time we'll be announcing the date, the day and the time for this webinar. I think by that time we should be and we must be a little more informed and more knowledgeable with regard to the disaster risk assessment, which is a damage assessment which is going on right now by several agencies, and we should be having some more experiences from the ground as well. I know several colleagues are already working with the communities, and we will try to bring them on board and give them a space here so they can share their experiences, and they can actually highlight to us that what is the situation on the ground and how the people are suffering. As I said earlier on, this is the next one is going to be the 5th and the last one, but we are already working on a number of other initiatives as well. There's a talk series which is coming up as well, and where we will be engaging with some of the experts in the field like yourself, and we will bring you in, and we'll want to have a kind of a conversation mode and ask a few questions, and then bring that to the larger set of audience. Similarly, we're working with a couple of others, our partners, to come up with a more a live session, physical session. And in the few weeks' time, maybe in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be having a roundtable in Islamabad And again, I would like to request all of you, and you'll be receiving the information and you'll be receiving the invites for that as well. So, mark it in your calendars, and we'll be very happy to engage with you on that front. Even more, we are actually very actively engaged right now with academia, especially the universities, and we are working on a number of initiatives. Even we're working on a small program which is mobilizing and encouraging our youth for coming up with climate smart solutions, innovative solutions. So we're setting up a small fund where we're funding those activities and some of those ideas which I'm sure that potentially they come up and they do graduate and materialize to long-term solutions. So a lot is in the pipeline, but right now, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. And we are really thrilled and we are really humbled for your participation and contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bilal Saab. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.